Crystal of Wisdom presents, even men of rare merit are dependent on their time.
In a small kingdom, there lived a man named Fabrizio. He was a handicraftsman coppersmith. He made all kinds of copper utensils, jugs, and even jewelry. All of these he sold or made to order. It has to be said that he liked making different kinds of jewelry the most. Fabrizio liked the beauty created from metal. In addition, Fabrizio liked to take on difficult work. For these reasons, he tried to make even ordinary products beautiful, adding patterns and ornaments where no one else had done them. Sometimes he made very beautiful products, and then, before putting them on sale or giving the completed order, Fabrizio himself admired the successful products for a long time. But Fabrizio didn't live richly. One might even say poor. He did not have enough money to buy expensive metals to make real jewelry. Fabrizio deep down dreamed of being a jeweler. He was sure that he had enough skill and experience and could become a famous jewelry artist, and maybe even the most famous, and not only in his kingdom, but also far beyond it. But for some reason, rich people did not come to his shop, did not make expensive orders, and did not buy his works. His buyers were simple craftspeople and other non-wealthy citizens. Sometimes Fabrizio received orders from rich persons and even from the royal courtyard, but only for ordinary tableware. For reasons unknown, he was sometimes called a blacksmith. Of course, Fabrizio could also make items as an ordinary blacksmith. He could not only shoe a horse, but also make a good knife or blade. But no matter what, Fabrizio dreamed of becoming a jeweler. He made very fine and beautiful jewelry from copper, which were gladly bought by not rich people, and how he got the nickname Blacksmith Fabrizio did not even remember. Perhaps someone once called him that and then someone else repeated it. Probably it was a long time ago, and no one remembered when and who started calling him that. Fabrizio realized that this nickname prevented him from achieving his goal, but he didn't know what he had to do to change the situation. Of course, Fabrizio could have remained a simple blacksmith. In doing so, he would surely be the best blacksmith in the kingdom. But Fabrizio did not consider it his calling. He was drawn to beauty. Beauty made of metal, of precious metal, was his passion, his dream. There was a story once. One evening a knight came to Fabrizio's workshop. He was a rich knight. The harness of his white horse was trimmed with silk and velvet. The family arms were embroidered on it in gold threads. His armor shone in the rays of the setting sun, and the top of his helmet was decorated with large feathers of unseen birds. Seeing a rich knight, Fabrizio decided it was fate. If the rich knight liked his work, word of his work might spread to other knights like him, or maybe his amazing skill would be known to the king, and then Fabrizio's long-held sword might come true. "What does the signor wish?" Fabrizio respectfully asked the knight. The knight held out his sword to him. It was clear that the sword had been forged quite recently. Perhaps the knight's old sword had been broken in battle or in a knight's tournament. So, the knight handed Fabrizio his sword and gave him a small bar of gold and a bar of silver. It was necessary to decorate the knight's sword from the given metals. The knight gave him until tomorrow morning to do the work. Fabrizio worked all evening and all night. He never slept a wink. Fabrizio used all his skill and fantasy. In the morning, the sword was ready. A knight came to pick up his sword. Fabrizio gently held out the finely decorated sword to the knight. The knight twirled the sword in his hands for a long time. It was evident how the decoration of the sword, made overnight by Master Fabrizio, liked the knight. The magnificent hilt shone in the rays of the rising sun and reflected in the eyes of the knight and in his armor. When he had finished looking at his sword, the knight, without getting off his horse, put the sword in its scabbard and got ready to ride. "And pay for the work?" Fabrizio asked him. "Be happy that I did not choose to test the sharpness of my sword on your body," said the knight. "That will be my reward for your work." Fabrizio immediately recognized that the stingy knight had no intention of paying him for his work, but there was still hope in him that the knight would tell the other knights about Fabrizio. After all, it was obvious that the knight liked Fabrizio's work very much. "My name is Fabrizio," shouted the master in the footsteps of the leaving knight. But the knight didn't hear him anymore, and only clouds of dust were left on the road, which dispersed like Fabrizio's dream. After this incident, Fabrizio fell into despondency. For days he could not work. Sadness and boredom overcame the poor craftsman. But gradually, Fabrizio pulled himself together. In addition, new orders came, and it was necessary to go to work. So another year passed. One day, a trade caravan from the east arrived in the kingdom. There were several horse-drawn wagons and a few camels loaded with large bales. The caravan belonged to a merchant named Said. The caravan set up in the town's market square. Said laid out beautiful oriental fabrics, rare spices, exotic goods and jewelry. A large crowd of people gathered around the caravan. Fabrizio was among them. He was not interested in fabrics and various outlandish things. He was looking intently at the jewelry that had been brought. Among the jewelry were some that Fabrizio could make himself. There were some that he had never seen before. But what caught Fabrizio's attention the most was one beautiful piece of jewelry made of gold and silver with several precious stones. On Fabrizio's question, Said told him that it was a tiara and a necklace, and that they were made by craftsmen in a far eastern country called Rajasthan. This jewelry is very expensive, and only a noble and rich person can buy it. Fabrizio was shocked by the beauty of this piece of jewelry. He stared at it for hours, trying to memorize every little detail. Seeing this unprecedented interest, Said allowed Fabrizio to touch the jewelry with his hands. After a few days, the caravan moved on to other cities. Inspired by the jewelry he had seen, Fabrizio felt a burning desire to create something truly remarkable with his own hands. Fabrizio hoped that after such work, his fame as a great master would go beyond his city and maybe even beyond the kingdom. From excitement and worry, Fabrizio could not sleep. His heart was racing. This was his star chance. Fabrizio thought in detail about the project of his future work. But there was one big problem. Fabrizio didn't have enough money to buy gold and silver for his project. He had a small remnant of the sword decoration of a miserly knight, but it was very little. The thought of a new project and a chance to become famous didn't give him rest day or night. And then Fabrizio decided to take a desperate step. He began to sell off his products that were still unsold. But the sales were going badly, and there was still not enough money. Fabrizio had to borrow money at a high interest rate and had to mortgage his workshop. Now he had enough money. He bought the right amount of gold and silver and a few more jewelry. Fabrizio believed that if fame and glory came to him, he would have enough money to pay off all his debts, and then a new life would begin for him. Fabrizio began working tirelessly, putting all his skill and creativity into the new project. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. And then Fabrizio finished his project. Fabrizio carefully brushed the dust off his creation. His necklace and tiara were decorated with intricate designs, each telling a different story and encrusted with several precious stones. In the sunlight, his necklace and tiara glittered with a light that was astounding. Fabrizio thought them dazzlingly beautiful. And Fabrizio was not wrong about the beauty of metalwork, for he was a master craftsman who had no equal in the kingdom. His creation was a true masterpiece, a testament to the master's exceptional talent. So the next day, Fabrizio put on his best clothes and took his carefully wrapped piece of jewelry and went to the king's castle. At the castle gate, Fabrizio said that he had come to sell the king a magnificent piece of jewelry for his queen. After a long wait, he was told that the king did not wish to buy anything today and was told to go home. The next day, Fabrizio came again to the king's castle. But this time, he was told that the king did not want to buy anything from him now, tomorrow, or ever, and that it would be better for Fabrizio if he left as soon as possible. Annoyed, Fabrizio went home again. His dreams were beginning to crumble. Fabrizio could barely contain his emotions, but there was still hope in him. The next day, Fabrizio took a desperate step. He came again to the royal castle and said that he wanted to give these magnificent jewelry to the queen as a gift, and he very much requested that the queen be told that they were made by a master named Fabrizio. The chief of the guards accepted the jewelry and promised to give it to the right person, and to Fabrizio's request he answered that everyone knows Fabrizio the blacksmith, and he does not need to be introduced. Fabrizio himself was told to go home and wait for an answer. A dejected Fabrizio went home. For several days he waited impatiently for news of the queen's or king's reaction, believing that his time was about to come. A week passed. Fabrizio began asking acquaintances who had relatives in the king's household if they had heard anything about the fate of his jewelry, if they had seen his jewelry on the queen. But everywhere he received a negative answer. Then one evening an acquaintance came to him and told him what had happened in the palace after Fabrizio had given the gift to the queen. The queen, when she heard that she had received a gift of jewelry made by a village blacksmith, refused to even look at it. The queen ordered the gift to be put in a lumber room and soon forgot about it. A grief-stricken Fabrizio could not find a place for himself. The beautiful piece of jewelry in which Fabrizio had invested all his heart and money was locked away in a lumber room, forgotten and unappreciated. His dream was shattered. In addition, he had almost no means of livelihood, and his workshop had been mortgaged for debts he would never repay. Fabrizio was devastated. He had hoped that his work would bring him the recognition he deserved, but instead it was rejected and forgotten. He felt the bitterness of failure and a deep sense of disappointment. Depressed Fabrizio could not find peace for days, yet he pulled himself together and continued his work. But the spark of talent that had shone in him was forever extinguished. His work was no longer as creative. A few years later, it so happened that the king's son ascended the throne. The young king decided to have a lavish wedding immediately. Everyone in the castle began to prepare for the festivities. At that time, the old queen remembered that some jewelry had been brought to her a few years ago. She ordered the servants to bring it from the lumber room. The old queen thought the jewelry was quite nice and called her son, the young king, and told him that she wanted to give him a wedding present. When the young king saw this jewelry, he was indescribably delighted. "It's a masterpiece!" shouted the young king. He was enraptured by the beautiful creation of the genius master. "This is divine! It's a brilliant creation. Who is its author?" The old queen was ashamed to say that it was made by a village blacksmith and said that she no longer remembered who the author of the jewelry was. But the young king did not calm down. He ordered to interrogate everyone in the castle until he found out who the author of this masterpiece was. After much interrogation, the young king was told that the jewelry was made by a master named Fabrizio, who lived in the city. The young king decided to go to the genius master himself. Taking a guard with him, he went to Fabrizio's house. But it turned out that his workshop where Fabrizio lived and worked had been sold for debt. The king entered the workshop. There were still some of Master Fabrizio's works there. Each piece made by the master reeked of unprecedented beauty of shapes and patterns. They were special creations, and time had no power over them. Then the king ordered Fabrizio to be sought immediately. He was found nearby. Fabrizio was old and very poor. The king decided to take the poor master with him to the castle. The king then bought up everything that had been made by the genius Fabrizio in the workshop and ordered it to be taken to the castle. In the castle, the king set aside several rooms for Fabrizio's products. These rooms were decorated with beautiful dishes and jewelry made by Fabrizio. The old master was fed, washed and dressed in the finest clothes. The king personally chose a room in which he ordered to create a workshop and fill it with everything Fabrizio desired and not to deny him anything. The genius master was allowed to make for the king whatever only Fabrizio wished. Any impulse of his creativity was welcomed. A few days later, the young king played a wedding and gave his bride a wonderful tiara and necklace, which once made a genius master Fabrizio. Later, the jewelry made by Master Fabrizio was passed on in the kingdom by inheritance and became family jewels. They survived more than one generation and always admired their unrivaled beauty. And the story of the genius master Fabrizio, who finally achieved recognition, became a legend that was also passed on for generations. That's how it happens that even people of rare merit depend on their century. Not everyone has the century they deserve. Many who have gotten it have failed to conquer it. Some deserved a better century. Good does not always triumph. Everything has its time. But geniuses have the advantage that their creations are eternal. And if this century is not their century, the centuries to come are theirs.
If you liked the video, give it a like.